Fanny, what a great way to incentivize companies by actually offering an incentive if they are sustainable. On that note, Fanny, we're seeing, for example, the UK is mandating climate-related disclosures, right? And we're definitely, I think I'm seeing this conversation in about 25 different countries that are looking to adopt it. And as you know, the SEC recently asked for comments from the industry about greenhouse gas emissions reporting, particularly for companies that are public or any that have announced any particular goals. Talk to us about that particular ruling and in terms of companies' preparedness and what your thoughts on in terms of expansion of those kind of disclosures.
Of course. So it's a great step, and I want to really thank the SEC and also all the investors that actually provided comment. It's a great step to help with the standardization of looking at sustainability, all the sustainability related risk as a material decision factor for investors and debt holders to actually make their decision into investing in this company. What the SEC did is very interesting. So just to take a step back, some will say it's too much. Of course,
yeah.
And most of us in the ESG world are saying it's great, but it's really not enough. Yeah. So what they're saying is they're starting with the companies will have, the large filers will have by a certain date and time, and they're giving a lot of times for companies to put that in place to disclose their scope 1 and scope 2 greenhouse gas emission. And for those that have goals around scope 3, or if scope 3 emissions are material, they need to actually disclose that as well. Only if it's material to their business or if they have targets. Yeah. So that's the first step. So the ones, there's also two other factors, which is the companies will have to disclose their transition risk. And so that's very interesting because basically that's a first step in the right decision where companies are going to have to analyze not only the impact they're having on the, not only how the environment impacts their business, but how their business impacts the environment. Right. And in all of that, how regulation will play a role in making their business evolve. So you think about, I cover the automakers. And so when you look at California regulation and the obligation of reduction of emissions for cars, this has a huge impact on the business, and it actually helps drive the electrification of the vehicles. And so we're starting to see the EV revolution within a lot of companies, and this is mix of, just market evolution, but also regulatory evolution, and companies will have to actually start looking and analyzing this risk.
Yeah, Fanny, I totally agree. I think this is absolutely a step in the right direction. I was noticing as an example, scope 3 disclosures are actually really important. When you look at somebody like Apple, less than 1% of greenhouse gas emissions of Apple is scope 1 and scope 2. 99% is scope 3. Kraft, 90% of Kraft is scope 3. And it's all because of the whole outsourced globalization, third-party supplier model that's being created. So your point about that scope 1, scope 2, good. Scope 3, if it's material, which in Apple's case, guess what, the 99%, or in Kraft's case, the 90% is going to be very material.
Or financial institution. I mean, most of our emissions are scope 3 emissions, for sure. And there's scope 3, I think, is very important. And I think the ESG people and also sustainability people are saying we need more. What about water? What about waste? What about on the social side? Yes. But I think, change takes time, and it's a first step. I think on the other factor of evolution is going to be on the shareholder side. And that's where, and thanks to that, we're seeing a lot of change, and you're seeing, I think one big thing to look at is the IFRS partnership with SASB, and they are working currently on a set of metrics to standardize them and to make sure, we all report the same data with the same unit. That would be a great start. And so hopefully that will impact positively the landscape. But it's hard for companies, and I think it's important to mention that.
Yeah. So Fanny, I just want to reinforce two things for the audience that you said. So the IFRS is a standard that over 25 countries have said that they will adopt, including the US. That's one I just wanted, so IFRS for the audience. The second thing I want to reinforce is when Fanny and I are talking about scope 3, we're literally talking about the supply chain. Yes. So it just shows the importance of your supply chain. And maybe the third piece, Fanny, that I'd like you to comment on that you just kind of brought up is, while Fanny and I started this conversation initially talking about climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, being green, the reality is this movement is much bigger. This is about E, S, and G. So Fanny, talk to us about just even outside of the kind of climate change, what are you seeing, what are you hearing in terms of trends around E or S or G?
Of course. So I think the trends we're seeing is it starts with E.
Yeah.
And that's important just because it's easier to measure. So it starts with scope 1, scope 2, because that's what you can control.
Yeah.
Then it's trickling to scope 3, and it's very hard. We are in the process of developing a strategy to reduce our scope 3 emissions. It's very hard. We don't control our clients' emissions. We have to say we can decide to exit or stay in a relationship, but it's very hard to influence that. And then you have all the other things, which are, as I said, you have water, waste. Those are trends. People are looking at that as well. Energy efficiency, that's for sure. And then on the social side, I think social is a little bit tricky, and it's going to come. The push is going to come from the U.S. because there is a real awareness that diversity, women, but also people of color are important for to build your business, to grow, and for long-term profit. But you also have other metrics. Turnover, are an important a metric as well that people are looking. And on the governance side, I think more and more the trend we're seeing is having a compensation linked to ESG targets. So I would say if I have to highlight the main theme in all three categories, I think it would be that.
Yeah, Fanny, very good point. I think you did a good job highlighting the S and G part of it. And I think the reinforcement that I want for the audience is, just as SEC will very likely ask for disclosure on greenhouse gas emissions, so a lot of the E part of it, very clearly we're seeing movement in some cases. For example, in the state of California, we're seeing movements in Germany and other places where greater disclosure on your social, basically diversity, equity, inclusion practices, your governance practices, and then from E perspective, going beyond greenhouse gas emissions to, where are you? Are you doing businesses in water stress environments and others? So disclosing a lot of that both for yourself and your supply chain is very clearly going in that direction very much.
Yes, and I just also want to add, it starts with the E also because it's something you can, as I said, you can quantify more easily. On the social and governance side, I think it's important. A lot of people are uncomfortable with that, but there are a lot of studies that are out there. It's not always a judgment call. We know what is the right thing to do. Something is just a little bit harder and it becomes a little bit political. But there is some on the social side also, you can find some key metrics to achieve, like 50% women and men, people of color in line with the U.S. population. There's very easy ways to know what your targets should be.
So Fanny, let's go to measurement for a little bit, and then I want to come back to a few other topics related to this. Many different frameworks, right? Some people kind of look at that and go, SASB, GRI, TCFD. Talk to us a little bit about frameworks out there, and do you see any kind of a consolidation or a standardization in kind of like in the future?
Yes, I mean the needs, and I'm not saying anything groundbreaking here, but the need for standardization is there. or won't go anywhere. But I think if we take the scope 1 and scope 2 as an example, people started by looking at, intensity. You had those that said, well, it should be absolute. What gas should we include? What should we not include? And I think we all came under the Science-Based Target Initiative being the relevant institute to validate the method of calculation first, and second, what is ambitious, which is in line with a 1.5 degree scenario. So I think as we go and as people are, trying different things, and I think it's important, companies should try different things, even if it's not the right way to report a metric. You just start and then you look, it doesn't work, you adjust. And I think that's what people did for scope 1 and scope 2. And then as more companies are reporting in different manners, we're going to manage, people will discuss and come to a conclusion. But the institute to look at, the partnership to look at is really the joint venture between the IFRS and SASB. And I think that institute is the one that's going to end up helping with the standardization of which metrics should be reported and what's the right units.
Yeah. Fanny, to your point, it's very similar to the conversation that I have with customers with large institutions is, take a look at the standards, because it'll help you decide which stakeholders do you want to target your ESG activities towards. It'll also help you decide what goals you want to have, which is what do you value, right? What's your what is it that you value, so you're willing to put your money and effort behind it. And then as you experience it, you can start setting targets in where you want to get to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we do. That's what I started in the loan business. What we do, or the bond business, we look at comparables. So we look at all your competitors and see what pricing they are depending on their credit profile. And I think it works exactly the same way for sustainability, with one thing in mind is we have a need, for example, in climate, to make sure the temperature raise does not increase by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, or we know the consequences are terrible, and we have to do it fast. The issue I have sometimes is, what about the other metrics? Do we really run into a catastrophe if we don't have 50% of women on the board and in leadership position? I think companies will not succeed long term, or they will, but not as much as they should. But it's hard to prove something. It's hard to prove that when you do the right thing, what the consequences would have been if you had not.
Yeah, I think time will tell, but maybe there's been tremendous examples of social discord, and that's led to a tremendous amount of instability, supply chain disruption.